Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Monday, March 10th. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. The city of Fresno is facing a $20 million deficit, and some point to past decisions that are now catching up to City Hall.
The city used short-term pandemic relief funds in order to enter into long-term financial obligations, while dramatically expanding the police department and fire department.
We'll learn how city officials might try to fix this in just a few minutes, but first, today's headlines. New details have emerged about the abrupt water releases from 2 Tulare County reservoirs in January. The Washington Post obtained a private memo from the Army Corps of Engineers, which oversees Lake Cahuilla and Lake Success. A colonel with the Army Corps informed the White House that the water could not reach Los Angeles and would be wasted if it was released. But the agency moved forward with the release of 2 billion gallons of water. The Post reports that the move was made largely to satisfy President Trump's order. Trump ordered the water releases to help fight wildfires in LA that had already been extinguished. Today is the last day to weigh in on a mining project along the San Joaquin River. The mining company Cemex has mined gravel for decades along the river. But now, as part of an expansion, it wants to drill deeper, at least 600 feet deeper. The company tells news media it wants to maintain the gravel supply for the city of Fresno, but critics say there's already enough gravel. They also say the project would further degrade the ecosystem along the river. Fresno County supervisors will ultimately decide whether to approve the project. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, recently laid off hundreds of employees with the potential for more cuts in the future. NOAA's work is expansive and includes running weather service stations in cities throughout the country. The agency also works to conserve marine life, like whales that can be found in the Pacific off California's coast. Miyoko Sakashida directs the Center for Biological Diversity's Oceans program.
These mass firings at NOAA are just a clear example of putting politics over people. If you're slashing NOAA staff, they're not going to be able to provide a lot of these key services that help the animals.
She says the center will monitor the impacts of the layoffs and seek legal action if the agency is unable to complete its duties as a result. It's spelling bee season, and star spellers in Fresno County are looking to bring home trophies. As KVPR's Samantha Rangel reports, one student from Fresno County is already headed to the Scripps National Spelling Bee.
More than 80 students competed at the Fresno County Spell-Off last month. The winner was Caroline Van Garcie from Alta Sierra Intermediate School in Clovis. Her Scripps qualifying word?
Excerpt. E-X-C-E-R-P-T. Excerpt.
That is correct. Congratulations, you're going to the Scripps National Spelling Bee.
Tied for third place was 11-year-old Warren Lee of Fugman Elementary School in Clovis. This was his second time competing. He says he's determined to win his way to nationals someday. If you could describe your spelling bee experience in one word, what would it be?
Sesquipedalian. It means having a large vocabulary. It's spelled Sesquipedalian, I think.
He nailed it. Van Garcie is the only speller in Fresno County headed to Washington, D.C. in May, but the county's final 4 will go on to the state spelling bee in April. For KVPR News, I'm Samantha Rangel.
Support for Central Valley Daily comes from the members of KVPR. Join at $8 or more per month and access ad-free NPR podcasts through NPR Plus. Give now at kvpr.org/donate.
And now to our main story. The city of Fresno is facing a $20 million budget deficit, and that has city leaders contemplating a new tax. One reason for the funding shortfall? Pandemic-era money has run out. Fresno city leaders chose to use temporary COVID-19 relief funds to boost spending on police and fire in recent years. Now that those funds have run out, the city still has to meet those contract obligations, except it's doing so with less money on hand. Does this mean residents will pick up the tab? To discuss Fresno's uncertain financial future, we spoke with Omar S. Rashad. He's an accountability reporter with Fresnoland. Fresnoland is a partner newsroom with the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. Omar starts us out by laying out the problem the city of Fresno is facing.
The city had a mid-year budget review last month, and the Fresno City Council learned from city staff in February that they project at least a budget deficit of $20 million. Not only is that deficit due to, sales tax not meeting projected figures, cannabis tax not meeting projected figures, there are also other reasons, but one key aspect is that city staff anticipate that 20 million figure to actually grow in the coming months. So really what we have now is a preliminary snapshot of where budget conversations are likely going to have tension points, maybe have some disagreements, maybe tough decisions will have to be made. The biggest aspect, though, of this current situation, $20 million budget deficit, is that the city used short-term pandemic relief funds in order to enter into long-term financial obligations while dramatically expanding the police department and fire department. And essentially a big aspect of this deficit before us is that there's no more pandemic relief funds. And so the real question is, how do we pay for expansions that have been brought on over the last few years?
And we're going to get into those pandemic relief funds. But first, I want to note that your report states that under Mayor Jerry Dyer's leadership, Fresno's police budget has grown by $74 million. The fire department's budget has grown by $52 million. Do we have specifics on what that money is being used for?
Yeah, so under Mayor Jerry Dyer, the police department and fire departments have both had their budgets expanded. And that does mean more police officers. That does mean more firefighters on streets in Fresno. Another aspect of this is that these temporary pandemic relief funds were used to cover police and fire payroll. They've been used to cover increased financial obligations from big contracts with the police union and fire union. Essentially, when we think of what are the sources of these federal pandemic relief funds, we're talking about the CARES Act, we're talking about the American Rescue Plan Act, also known as ARPA. And then specifically for fire departments, we're talking about the SAFER grant, a federal grant that was used to dramatically expand the city's firefighter staffing.
And clearly, the political dynamic and federal funding across the board is in a very different state than it was when the city of Fresno originally got this money. I thought it was really interesting that City Manager Georgianne White basically told you that this temporary money essentially increased the city's financial responsibility in the long term, knowing that the ARPA money would stop, and she called that a, quote, risky bet. That was interesting to me that city leaders were willing to admit that this was a bet that they took in a way.
Yeah, no, and I think folks in City Hall know what they did here. I can't answer whether or not they were thinking very clearly about the long term, like, hey, is this going to end up becoming a bill that we want taxpayers to foot in the future? But what I can say is that I've talked with several city officials, including on the city council, and I've asked them, like, hey, looking back, like, do you regret entering into these long-term financial obligations to expand police and fire? And it's been a hard line of no, there's no regrets at all. We needed to expand police and fire. We needed more, firefighters, police officers on the ground. And that's really been the firm, sentiment that I've heard from city leaders about, hey, would you do something differently? So yes, absolutely. It's super interesting how, City Manager Georgianne White is able to publicly share that this was a bit of a risky bet. But another thing she mentioned is that she doesn't want to look in the rearview mirror. She wants to focus on how the situation could be better in the future and essentially how to close a $20 million budget gap.
And it's worth noting the budget year ends in June, late June, right? So this is going to be over the next few months. We'll get more details.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a tax that would be on Fresno residents. I think you mentioned in your report the city of Clovis actually recently had a public safety tax as well. He's floated that idea, Mayor Jerry Dyer. Any idea on if residents have weighed in on that? Is it too early to speak to that yet?
So that's exactly right. The mayor told me that he spoke with each sitting city council member about potential ways to essentially figure out how to stave off this deficit, how to bring a balanced budget home. And in those conversations, he's discussed two potential strategies with the tax. And he made sure to really stress, hey, these are preliminary conversations. He wouldn't move forward with a tax without first polling or surveying residents. He first needs to make sure that residents would be palatable to a tax. But essentially, there are a few ways you could structure it. He actually referred to Clovis directly and said that it could be a general sales tax like Clovis. It could be a specified tax where revenue from a tax could only go towards a specific source. And essentially, I think folks in Fresno City Hall last November, they see a successful public safety tax get passed over in Clovis. And on top of that, a public safety tax that's actually just a general sales tax. So there's no restriction on where that tax revenue could be used.
When would voters potentially see this tax on the ballot?
Yeah. So the mayor said he emphasized this. It would be no sooner than 2026. Once again, he said that he would want to first poll and survey residents. And these are really preliminary conversations. But one thing in particular, there are some other strategies that the mayor has here. He's mentioned the city could require more fees from Airbnb, VRBO, the vacation rental app, also Uber and Lyft. He could require more fees from those companies for operating in Fresno. But one thing he said very directly to me was there's no doubt that revenue from a potential tax in the future would dramatically outweigh any revenue from another strategy, including raising fees on VRBO, Airbnb, Uber, Lyft. So yeah, it really does seem like right now, when we talk about the future for the city of Fresno, this tax appears to be one of the best ideas on the table that city officials are thinking about.
Omar S. Rashad, accountability reporter for Fresnoland. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And that does it for today's show. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
Each morning, it's a new opportunity, a chance to start fresh. Up First from NPR makes each morning an opportunity to learn and to understand. Choose to join the world every morning with Up First, a podcast that hands you everything going on across the globe and down the street, all in 15 minutes or less. Start your day informed and anew with Up First by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts.